Hello and welcome to our Positive Health webinar series, and thank you so much for joining today, where we will be talking about a personalized approach clinicians take when formulating herbal remedies for menopausal symptoms. My name is Kim Fancher and I will be your host today, and we here at Positive Health are just so honored to be able to bring experts in to share some really great information on menopause topics like this one that are important to you. So now I'd like to get us kicked off. I'm very happy to introduce Kay Sidahmed, who has joined us today. Again, she did a webinar for us last year, and it was so great, and looking forward to hearing more about what she has to say. Kay holds a Master's of Science degree in clinical herbal medicine, along with a MS and PhD in agricultural sciences. In her work as a clinical herbalist, she focuses largely on menopause support, and she is passionate about bringing people together and creating communal and inclusive spaces of learning and exploration. Thank you so much, Kay, for being part of our Positive Health webinar series. Just wondering if you could tell us a little bit more about your career and how you got into this space.
Yeah, thank you so much. Hi, Kim. Thank you. Hello, everyone. Thank you, Kim. Thank you, Colette. I'm really excited and happy to be here again. To start us off, I always start us off with the disclaimer to keep everything in the legal framework. So just the information that this presentation is for educational purposes only. It has not been evaluated by the Food and Drug Administration, and I do not practice medicine, and my work is not intended to diagnose, treat, cure, or prevent diseases. So this is me. Kim already said a lot about me, which is great. About my background, you can find me at herbalremedies.com. That is my website. And yes, I do focus on menopause transition, second half of life well-being, and family health. I do also, additionally, I'm a certified forest therapy guide and offer forest bathing events and outings. I am a yoga teacher, and I'm also a certified death doula. I do work with people. I love working with people in one-on-one settings as well as in group settings. The group setting works a little bit different than the one-on-one setting work, and I do offer online work as well as in-person consultations for people who live close by. All right, so let's dive into what we're going to cover today. So I'm going to start with an overview, like point of view, holistic menopause support, just sort of like to frame my talk a little bit, and then go a little bit into the pillars of well-being and what I mean by that, and how, why and how that is important if we're working with herbs with regards to menopause transition. And then really the larger part of that of my presentation is really about how do we actually work with herbal support and how do we approach this. And I've included some custom herbal formulations from actual clients I've been working with. And then we have some time for questions and answers in the end. All right. So I love to think of menopause as a portal into our second half of life. And it really directs this time of transition. I like to think of it, it directs our attention to the key aspects of our health that really then become important as we're stepping and journeying through this portal and into the second half of life, right? So these challenges and discomforts that we experience, some of us more, some of us less, they also have the reason to be there, because I like to think of them, they are sort of our reminders of make sure that during second half of life we pay attention to the health of our brain and of our heart and of our musculoskeletal system. That doesn't mean we have to let these challenges or discomforts become so much and so overbearing that we can barely function. But just to also sort of like take this as a bit of a reminder of it, it gently nudges us and tells us, here, this is what we want to take care of. And then I also like to think of this time as it's a great opportunity, and I think all of us do this naturally, to take stock of, what has worked so far in our life, and all of us do some pruning maybe, and we sort of have a chance to re-envision life going forward, and apply changes on a greater scheme where we would like to see changes. There's definitely an unleashing of creative energy and life force happening for us, and is in store for us, and we really want to feel well and do well during this transition, so we can actually embrace this creative energy and make good use of it for us. So here's some food for thought, and I'll touch on this as we go through this presentation today. And I mentioned this before. Yeah, so the transition, perimenopause, menopause, is really, it's supposed to be noticeable for us. So it is a reminder that we're undergoing a huge transition and an incredible change. But at the same time, it just shouldn't keep us from living our lives well. And luckily, there are many tools in our toolbox available to us how to make that happen. Herbs are not a replacement for hormones, and hormones are not a replacement for herbs. And that is very, very important. It's important for me as a clinical herbalist to say that, because sometimes people approach me and come to me and say, I really don't want to work with hormones. I want to work with herbs instead. And I just always have to say, we can absolutely work with herbs, but please know they are not a replacement, or we're not working with them in place of hormones. There's a place for both of them, and it's up to people to decide, and depends on the individual situation if somebody chooses to work with one or the other or both. There is no such thing as a menopause herb. I'll say something to that later, and maybe things become more clear throughout. I deliberately kind of put it there because that may make people go, huh? What do you mean? I can Google herbs for menopause and all of these things show up. So I hope this becomes clearer as we walk through this. And then both hormones and herbs, they do more than just addressing the discomforts like hot flashes. Yeah, that's important. Also, if you're working with somebody who's a certified menopause practitioner who helps you with hormonal treatment, then they also make sure that you understand that, and that people understand that hormones, the estrogen that's declining throughout the menopause transition, that they have many functions in our body. And so this is where hormone therapy is really helpful. And herbs, likewise, they support so much more than just the acute discomforts. I always like to say both of them, they're not solutions we just swallow. There's a whole lot we ourselves are empowered and will hopefully be empowered to do and take into our own hands to really make the most out of this transition and keep the discomforts at bay. So no matter which support tools you choose, this is really important that we are supporting all of us, the whole being, the physical aspect, the mental, emotional, and also the spiritual aspect. And then there is certainly a short-term support where we want to address some acute discomforts and challenges, but also we're supporting our long-term health vision. So we're supporting beyond the actual transition and really into our long-term second half of life. The pillars of well-being, I don't I went into them a little more detail during the last presentation, so I don't want to do that today. I just put them here, and you're all very familiar with this, right? These are all things that we really want to pay attention to, and every now and then take stock at what works well in our life and what doesn't, and where may we ourselves want to pay a bit more attention to in order to support our overall balanced well-being. There's one pillar of well-being, the last one, the environmental health, I just want to talk about a little bit more, and this is with regards to xenoestrogens, which simply means estrogenic substances that are not made. So this is not estrogen our body makes, but these are substances who either are estrogen in forms of, for example, if we do hormone therapy, or substances that have an estrogenic effect and interact with the estrogen receptors in our cells, and that could become problematic. So there's just some things that we can be mindful of and avoid some of these if we're switching, in our kitchen, if we're switching our food storage from plastic to glass, if we're avoiding agrochemicals in our gardens and in our homes, and are just being mindful of what kind of food we consume and how this food may or may not have been treated. What do we put on our skin? And I always like to point people to the Environmental Working Group website for that, because they have some really great resources to help us navigate this a little bit and understand what may be safer options for us. And then, as I mentioned before, I like to think of hormone therapy as xenoestrogens, and not to paint them as a villain or as evil and condemn them, but just so we pay extra attention to supporting a healthy hormone metabolism and healthy elimination, so that the hormones that we take are actually doing what they're supposed to do in our body, but that they also leave our body at a rate and at a time when they're supposed to leave our bodies. And there's a particular focus on liver health and digestive health, because this is how we excrete these products and byproducts that our body then after a certain time no longer needs. And this is where herbal support, for example, can be incredibly useful and helpful. If all you do is you're on hormone therapy and all you do is work with some gentle liver support health and some gentle digestion health, that can be a wonderful additional support thing you can do to yourself. Yes, these are some, again, I don't want to go into detail here because I have talked about this much more detail during my last webinar, but it's always important for me to name these and frame these when we as clinical herbalists work with humans and with plants. There are some guiding principles, and all of them are really important to us, so that we first and foremost we understand plants as our allies, as fellow beings who we share this planet together. And so there's this sense of kinship and co-evolution, and how we approach working with them, rather than just commodifying them as something that we swallow to help us feel better or be better. Food as medicine is one of my favorite approaches when it comes to herbal support. Beyond this or for that, I'll address this more, as we go along, meaning that's what I meant when I said there's no such thing as a menopause herb. And there is a place for this herb for that. There's a place for, I have a sore throat. Is there what kind of herbal tea could I, for example, drink to help soothe that? That's absolutely a place for that. But if we're talking about bigger transitions and bigger conditions like the menopause transition, we really want to support the individual human and step into what I call plant-human matchmaking. There are the terms plant and human energetics. I'll speak more to that later a little bit. That is an important aspect of our work. And as I mentioned before, the pillars of well-being, that they are always, 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 no matter if we're working with menopause or autoimmune support or anything else, the pillars of well-being are always taken into account. And then very important, the protocol safety. Yeah. There, especially with regards to special circumstances, special vulnerable communities, people who are pregnant, there's certainly certain herbs we absolutely never want to work with. During pregnancy, there are possible herb drug interactions, so we need to be mindful and knowledgeable of medications people take and how to work with herbs, and again, what kind of herbs we may want to have to avoid during certain circumstances. And then last but absolutely not least, it's really important how the herbs are sourced. Do they come from sustainable and ethical sourcing? I don't want to linger here for too long with the phytoestrogens and go into too much detail, but I included the slide because I always realize that there's a lot of misconception and misunderstanding, and that is not to blame anyone because it is confusing what phytoestrogens actually are. And unfortunately, the name in and of itself is a little bit is really unfortunate because it creates this idea of there's something like estrogens that we could take from plants. And that is not what phytoestrogens are. They are not hormones. These are constituents, biochemical molecules in some of the plants that simply are structurally very similar to estrogen. And therefore, they can bind partially, mostly, to the estrogen receptors of our own cells. And then, depending on what's going on, they could either induce estrogenic actions in our body, or they could also protect us from an overload of estrogens from the outside. So, key takeaway, bottom line is phytoestrogens can be really, really great and helpful. And the three plants I put here on top, you see red clover. The one in the middle is chaste tree or vitex, Agnus castus. You may have come across this one. And then at the bottom is soy. And maybe you want to take a note about, maybe somebody wants to ask that question during the Q&A and remind me of that. There is some, I personally find that as a practitioner exciting. There is a company working with bringing out a soy supplement that will actually be an FDA approved phyto medication tending to menopause transition. That's just something, ask me about it again if you want to learn a little bit more about that. Anyway, so bottom line, phytoestrogens are not hormones, that they are simply molecules in the plants that are structurally similar and can therefore interact with our estrogen receptors. Let's see. All right, yes, now we come to there's no such thing as a menopause herb. So you may ask, what about black cohosh? Because if you ever Google menopause and herbs, I'm sure black cohosh is mentioned in there. And yes, so traditionally, and also in contemporary modern clinical herbal, science-based clinical herbal application, there is certainly an affinity, that we speak of affinities, that this plant has for people who are experiencing menopause challenges, right? The most current research does not point to any estrogenic activity, meaning not so much of the phytoestrogenic compounds in black cohosh, but mostly an action through various mechanisms of action on our nervous system. And that also totally makes sense, because black cohosh, what I see a lot is that when some people, not for all, but for some people who experience hot flashes or night sweats, black cohosh can be very helpful as part of a formula. That's always important. And that I see this mostly effective for people who experiences hot flashes and experience them mostly when they also realize they are right now having a stressful time of their day, for example. And when there's like this combination of heightened stress and the hot flashes, this is where I see black cohosh coming in very, very helpful. But you'll see later in my examples, there's also a whole other way how black cohosh really can be helpful during the transition. So what is important to know, it's an at-risk plant, meaning it's really, really important to know where, if you work with black cohosh, that it comes from a trusted professional herbalist source that never ever harvests black cohosh in the wild, because it would decimate the population. So it has to come from companies who grow black cohosh and cultivate it, and it always has to be from cultivated sources. And then, as I said before, I really like it best not as an individual simple, but really as part of a formula. Right, so let's dive into the more the practical side. How do we put together an herbal formula for somebody? And everybody does this a little different, but there's some, common ground. What I really like to frame this as, so what I put on the top here: nervous system, cardiovascular, musculoskeletal system, liver support, and then specific needs. This is really like something for the nervous system and the heart and circulation and muscle, joints, bones, liver, that goes pretty much in every single formula I built for clients. But then it's different herbs, right? Because we have so many different herbs that can be supportive of liver health and of musculoskeletal health, and that depends on the individual person. And then specific needs can be anything else, right? So maybe there is a specific necessity for dry and thin tissues, vaginal tissues, but also skin. There could be some more addressing some more hormonal support necessary. Maybe somebody experiences heightened pain, so there may be some short-term pain herbal support in there. Digestive system often shows up as something that needs to be supported, not for everyone, but for a lot of people. And then, so if you look at the nervous system side, yeah, right, you see, I mean, that's why I'm saying there's no, it's not, oh, this is a nervous system herb that will do. It really depends on what is going on with each individual, right? Is sleep challenged, or is somebody experiencing stress, anxiety, depression, mood? All of these things play into the picture. And so how do we go about, right? So again, we're formulating for the person, always for the individual human, not the condition. So we're formulating for the whole being. I said that before, right? So we're basically addressing the whole being, which means all of the organ systems that are part of our physical makeup. But however, there are some that may need specific support and where we want to start with and focus on. And then herbal actions, I have a slide. The next slide, I just show it to you just for fun, real quick. We have some fancy terms that we as practitioners use and work with that sort of like are like some short keys for us to understand and in our own language of how herbs may or may not work and why they may or may not be indicated for a certain person. And then the human energetics. So I mentioned that before. So what I mean by that is, let's think of yourself, right? Or I can speak of myself. My entire life, I've really been somebody who I'm the person who always has cold hand and cold feet most of the time, right? So for me as a practitioner, that means my circulation is in need, generally in need of an extra boost, because cold hand and feet means the blood flow to my extremities is not going all that great. And that is my sort of like my overall constitutional energetics. However, now I'm 51, so I am still perimenopausal, but I'm in that transition and I am starting to realize I'm running a little warmer in general. right? And then as we move along through this, drier stages, drier skin, drier vaginal tissues, all of that comes in. So that is what I mean by generational energetics. And then there's tissue specific conditions, right? Somebody can be overall dry, but still, for example, have water accumulating around the ankles and have excess moisture in that particular part. And so the herbs we work with, they have their own energetics, how they can, depending on their mechanisms of action within our bodies. And so we're kind of matching that, right? So if somebody is experiences excessive overall dryness, then we're coming in for sure with herbs also that create some more moisture, or not necessarily create moisture, but help the body to hold on to the tissues, to hold on to the moisture. And we're kind of mixing and matching that, right? For somebody with me, like cold hand and cold feet, we're bringing in herbs that increase circulation and therefore warm us up a little bit low. Think about your, your cup of warm ginger tea that you may enjoy drinking in the winter, for example. And then always the individual personality. That's also an aspect that's very important. Herbs have a personality, people have a personality. I work with this, not all of my colleagues do, but I like to always have this a little bit in the back of my mind. The terms here at the bottom, this is like professional language, right? Like key herbs, but I think you get what I mean. Like there may be an herb that is particularly a plant that particularly stands out to me to support an individual, and then I pull some other plants in that may play very well with this one particular plant. Here's a list. I'm not going to linger here. This is just for giggles. Some of these fancy terms we use, what herbs can do, what we call herbal actions. And just to point this out, right, there's, for example, if you look at the musculoskeletal system, we have this term antispasmodic, meaning that is a plant that, among other things, can help with release some of this muscular tension and cramps. And then if you look, you can also find this term in the digestive system or in the genitourinary system, right? When it comes to maybe like uterine crampings and spasms. And so there are some plants that actually have an affinity for all three of these systems and have this antispasmodic property. And if you have a human that may experience challenges in all three of these areas, so that may be a great plant to pull in for that particular human. So just real quick, that was also in my other presentation. I just want to sort of, as a reminder, when, like an example, if like there's somebody who really struggles with brain fog, then we don't just throw any good old herb that somebody may have at some point said, oh, this helps with brain fog, but we want to ask a little deeper, what's going on here, right? Are we experiencing, which all of us do, menopause-related brain changes, real structural changes in our brain? Is there is it particularly challenging with regards to cognition or focus and memory? Do we maybe need to support circulation so that blood flow to the brain happens? Is there maybe inflammation at other parts of the body happening that may affect this experience of brain fog? How does liver and intestinal elimination work? Is somebody experiencing heightened stress, sleep, mood? All of these things are sort of like taken into consideration and where we may want to start then. And then, so this to say, these herbs I mentioned here at the bottom, right? They are not like the brain fog herbs, but they each one is very different and has different characteristics and different actions. But they can be very, very helpful when it comes to brain fog, depending on the circumstances. And then similarly to mood support, right? We don't just like throw any good old herb that maybe help with mood without knowing what's really going on with somebody. And maybe we need to look and stabilize first what's going on in the gut and stabilize gut health before we do anything else. Or maybe we need to really help somebody to support their sleep. And that sleep support in and of itself may already then help somebody to balance their mood much better. Yeah. So I really want to spend the last part of my presentation on these two examples of clients of mine. Both of them are biological females. Both of them identify as women with she, her pronouns. So my first client is 49 years. She is perimenopausal, which means she still gets her period relatively regular, so monthly, but over the past 2 years, the length of her cycle varies quite a bit. Sometimes she has longer cycles. Sometimes it's like 32 days. Sometimes they're shorter, only 26 days. So this is like mainly what she has observed with regards to cycle length. And then one of the main challenges for her is this sensation of what she called scatterbrained. So she described herself as somebody who always used to be very focused and organized, and just has a hard time to bringing all this together. Sleep is great in general for her. She gets solid 7 to 8 hours of sleep, has no trouble falling asleep. Sometimes, depending on what's going on in her life, she has children, she has teenagers in the house, and she's married. And so life is busy in their household. And sometimes, depending on what's going on, she experiences these circular thoughts right when she is in bed and tries to go to sleep. These thoughts that, like, when our brain just doesn't want to shut up and shut down and we just have trouble falling asleep. She does feel more discomfort during her luteal phase, so meaning the time of her cycle from ovulation through the menstrual bleeding. And for her, she experiences this mainly in joint pain, blurry vision, this overall feeling of heaviness and like being in a haze. She has significantly more bloating during this time of her cycle, and also some days with heart palpitations, more pronounced during the second half. And then what she calls, some days where she experiences herself as very thin-skinned and more irritated. Libido has lowered over the past couple years for her, which I think is, I certainly can speak to that myself. Cholesterol, blood work, her LDL is elevated, also something that is very normal and is explained with the lowering of estradiol, that the LDL goes up. Her HDL is normal, her triglycerides are normal, which is a good thing. Also, I didn't put it on her, but her glucose is also in a good, healthy range. She eats a great diet, very plant-focused. She does eat some meat, some fish, but mostly plant-focused. Whole foods nutrition, meaning ultra-processed foods don't take, they don't play a role in her nutrition. Processed foods, in form of, sometimes she buys these like frozen bowls, veggie bowls, but really mainly like from whole plants. She doesn't drink alcohol. She exercises daily, has actually a great variety of cardio and strength training, weight bearing exercises, and stretching. She has a daily meditation routine, meditation, yoga, and most days also that includes yoga asana, so the movement part of yoga. She does not take any medication. And she right now doesn't feel like the need to also go on any kind of hormonal treatment. So I like to work always, if I can, and if the client lets me, and if it's reasonable, I like to work with a tea, an herbal tea, and an herbal tincture, which is usually an alcoholic extract, but there are also glycerin extracts or vinegar extracts. And there's a reason for the herbal tea. I really love doing that. Not only, but also because just the act of pouring yourself a cup of tea and making a tea and seeing the actual plants in the tea, that in and of itself is a great opportunity for some actual plant connection, seeing the plants, thanking the plants, and a moment to pause and just take an inhale and an exhale and sit down and be present with your cup of tea. However, there's also very phytochemist, if we're talking like phytochemistry for a moment, and don't worry, I'm not, going to go back into chemistry school, but there's you pull out different plant constituents with a hot water extraction, which is the tea, than with alcohol. And so, for example, I always like to put like the herbs you see here in this daily tea, gotu kola, nettles, holy basil. If you have them as a hot water extraction, you pull out the minerals, which you don't get in an alcohol extraction. And so if we're thinking of menopause transition, second half of life, and the importance of mineralization and bone health, then this is why I always love to work with plants like this in a tea extraction for somebody. And then hawthorn and rose, hawthorn is in the rose family as well. They have fantastic, what is usually called antioxidant, you've probably heard that term, properties, and also anti-inflammatory properties. And we're addressing, general underlying to keeping sort of like inflammation at a healthy level, so that the elevated LDL, because that's the problem, we have elevated LDL and inflammation together, and then we have the plaque buildup happening. And so if we keep the inflammation in check, then the elevated LDL also is not does not cause such a threat as it would be if there would be inflammation in the works as well. And in the daily tincture, so the first one, chaste tree, is really something that is in here. She's still menstruating. Chaste tree supports progesterone balance. And so once this client moves out of perimenopause into menopause, not bleeding anymore, and progesterone levels just stay where they are more or less and don't have these fluctuations, the chaste tree will move out of her formula. And then all these other herbs have various applications. I don't have the time to go into all of them, but they are really all addressing, some of them address things like experience of drier tissues, experience of heart palpitations, liver support, mood support, nervous system support, to sort of like balance out and help with this experience of irritation. So all of this is built in there. And then the passion flower, as a simple, also as a tincture, she takes that as needed on these nights when her circular thoughts can't calm down. So that's not something she takes every night, but she has it, she knows how to work with it and works with it. Food is medicine. She already does a fantastic job with regards to her nutrition, and that helps to also for her to regulate what she eats, when she eats, especially during these times in her cycle when she experiences more bloating. Gotu kola, dandelion root, she works with those also as needed. Gotu kola can be really helpful for somebody who struggles with focus. And again, that's not something she works with as a tincture on a daily basis, but as needed. Yeah, I spoke to these other things, no alcohol, daily movement, that's all already in there. And then real quick, the second example we have, I'm just going to go over this quickly. We're in a different stage, 61 years old, menopause happened 6 years ago. So the point where she stopped bleeding has not been bleeding for a year. That's the menopause point. Was reached 6 years ago. She is on hormone therapy. She takes estradiol and progesterone since she has a uterus. So having progesterone in there is important. She experiences some joint pain and a bit of muscle cramping. So she has some leg cramping, restless leg syndrome, and then vaginal thinning and drying. Not too much because she's on hormone therapy, but still a bit. And then her bowel movements aren't daily. There's some bloating after meals, and she goes for walks mostly and has an animal protein focused diet and mainly lettuce and tomatoes as veggies. So if we first start at the bottom, we really have worked on shifting the focus from animal protein, not to stop eating meat, but to also really increase the variety of plant foods that she eats, and also make her more aware of how to also get good and healthy protein, but also complex carbohydrates and fiber from veggies. We've worked on increasing daily movement and including, more importantly, a variation so that there's cardio and strength training. And she also daily tea, daily tinctures. Similarly, daily tea, you see some of the same herbs here, like gotu kola and nettles and hawthorn. We added chamomile to help with digestive discomforts and digestive bloating. And then there's plantain. I really mainly put plantain in there. If you have it in water as a tea, it has some really, it's almost like a little slimy. That's really like moistening support and hydrating and moistening support, and especially for her to help her with sort of like moistening the lining of her gut. That also helps with the bowels to move along and to get to more regular bowel movements. And then in the daily tincture, I just want to point out two things here. You see, black cohosh is in this daily tincture, and you notice that this woman does not experience any hot flashes or any night sweats. And the black cohosh in this case is in there because it's an incredible, helpful muscle relaxant. So because she experiences these muscle crampings and restless leg syndromes, so it via the nervous system, black cohosh relaxes the nerves and relaxes the muscles. And so that is why this made it into this tincture for this woman. There is turmeric in there. Maybe also something you may want to ask me in the Q&A about turmeric and what to really be mindful of, with especially with regards to the menopause transition. And I love working with it in a formula, but not as a simple and as a single, especially not for the menopause transition. So just some quick, really some key points. We talked about this, right? We're customizing for the person and for what's going on, finding the lowest effective dose. That's something an herbalist will help with. We talked about liver health, why that is important. Sourcing herbs is incredibly important, and I always, as a go-to, it is such a confusing. If I wouldn't know anything about herbs, it would be just so confusing for me out there. So, rule of thumb: avoid the grocery stores and the chain pharmacies, and really go. And if you need, I have a list of resources I put together. You can send me an email. I'm always happy to send this list out to people to get them a starting point of where they can source. Knowing where to buy, why not, how to work with them. So we are also avoiding wasting plant material, and then always have in mind, there can be herb drug interactions and other things, why or why not you may want to be mindful of, and maybe ask a clinical herbalist for help, so that you really work with a safe protocol. So just summarizing this up, key takeaways. Remember, I really love this thinking of menopause as a portal tending to all the pillars of well-being. And then again, this is a toolbox. Choose the support tools based on your current individual situation, right? Customization of hormone therapy, customization of herbal support, and then we think about not just short-term wellness and health goals, but also really long-term and second half of life support. And then always reassessing. We change, our circumstances change, our bodies change. So always reassessing in intervals what's going on and how may we need to adjust these tools in our toolbox. All right, with that, I ran a little bit over. I'm sorry about that, but I'm at the end and I open it for questions.
Okay. That was wonderful. Kay, as always, you shared so much really great information in this presentation. And, there were so many great points that you made, especially, as it helps us support our whole well-being, mind, body, and spirit. I really liked that point. And also, it really kind of rang true to me when you mentioned, treating plants as our allies. We do live life with them and depend on them. And I just thought that that was a great word to use in regards to our relationship with plants. We do have a few questions. And first off, just want to just ask you about, are there specific chain pharmacies that should be avoided or just in general? Do you have some more information on that?
Yeah, that's a great question, an important question. As I said in this one slide, I mean, just like, I have, and I don't want to single out and name any particular one here, but in general, I would just avoid your grocery store and your big box chain pharmacy. And I have seen every now and then where I'm like, oh wow, look at that. They have this product here, right? But I'm knowledgeable. I'm a professional. I know what this is. And you the average non-herbalist person just simply has no way of identifying what that is or isn't. And so there's also products on the shelves that I mean, we have, we have oversight, and they're being tested, right? So it's not so much, my concern is not, sometimes there can also be a concern for quality with regards to what would it do to our bodies. My concern is really mainly about that it could be plants that have been sourced, like for example, an at-risk plant like black cohosh that was wildcrafted and is sold in a product, and it shouldn't be, right? Or it could be a product source like a plant. You really want to know, how did this, was the soil healthy your plants grew in? Because if the soil was healthy, it wasn't healthy, then the plant in and of itself cannot really provide you with a lot of qualities and healing. And similarly, I always ask about, how have the people been treated who've been growing these plants and harvesting these plants and bottling them, right? Did they receive fair wages? Were they treated well and
Yeah.
fair, and just? And because if that doesn't happen, then again, there's this bigger overarch of, this cannot be healing to you if harm happened along the way for this plant to end up in the bottle that you're using. So yeah, so that is a great question. It's a tricky one. I always say to people, if you have a local health food store, that's a great way to start, and also ask them questions, right? But
Okay.
I know that they usually pay a lot more attention to this. And then again, I have, people can email me, and I have a list that I love to send out to people, just to get them going, saying, here are some herb companies where you can order online, or you may find them in your local health food stores, and start there as a good starting
Okay.
point.
Are there some specific herbal brands that you would recommend?
Yeah, and I'm not being paid by anybody, I just want to make that sure. But like, for example, like some that really come to mind for me is like, the bigger ones, like Herb Farm, for example, is one. They sell mainly tincture products. I see that in my health food store, Urban Moonshine is one of them. They have some tinctures, some capsules. Gaia herbs, maybe something you've come across. They have, they're really great. I've actually visited their herb farm down in North Carolina, and see how they grow their herbs. And so those are some of the bigger ones. There are others, that
Okay.
I can think of, but those are good ones to start with. Yeah.
Awesome. And how quickly do herbal medicines typically take to work? I know it's not going to be anything overnight, but generally speaking, when can you see some kind of change or
Yeah,
difference?
it's a great question. And actually, there are some that work instantaneously and overnight. Like you remember that first client I mentioned, who sometimes has these circular thinking at night, and when she can't shut her brain down. And so passion flower, for example, that does work
Oh, okay.
instantaneously. This is why we pull that in and say, just, take some passion flower, and I gave her a dosage half an hour before you go to sleep. And if it takes too long, maybe take a little bit more. So there are some things, this is why tinctures are so great because they go so fast into the bloodstream and travel through the body. If we're talking at, let's say, like bigger things, bigger picture things that need a shift, right? Then something may need a longer time. So it can be sometimes and it depends on the person and on the individual in the situation. It can be a week, it can be 2 weeks, it can be 3 weeks until somebody really all of a sudden noticeably says, oh, you know what? My hot flashes have reduced from 1 every hour to 3 a day, right? For example, something like that. That always depends a little bit, but there is also some, or if we're speaking of like muscle relaxation, again, we have some much faster acting herbs there that can take action much, much faster, but others, like the bigger picture ones, the long-term ones, they just require a steady, continuous, longer term interaction. Yeah.
Right. I mean, is it more common to need a customized blend like some of the things that you talked about, the examples that you showed today? Or, does a single herb tend to do the trick in most cases?
So again, if you really talk to the single herb, you really, I mean, the single herb does a trick if you're really talking about something like, I just for tonight, I need some help falling asleep. You know, if somebody has chronic problems with falling asleep, that's a very different avenue. But if somebody just says like, I know what it is, just tonight I need some help, your single herb might very well do the trick, right? The formulation just is because you have these different, they play together and they have different laws. Sometimes they can add one to the other and increase, like one herb bumps up the activity of the other herb. Sometimes they balance each other out, right? You have an herb in there that may be maybe very drying, then you put another herb in there that provides more moisture, and so you balance this level out for somebody. And you can, and with the customization, you can really work with what happens with this actual person, right? As I said, there may be somebody who has menopause discomforts but does, for example, not experience hot flashes. Then we don't need to worry about that, and we may need to focus on other avenues. Yeah.
That makes sense. Yeah. So if I were only going to take a single herb for, during my menopause journey, at least to start out with, which would you recommend for perimenopause versus postmenopause?
Great question, and I really can't recommend a single herb because that is really the conundrum of that there's no such thing as a menopause herb or a
Okay.
this herb for that. So I absolutely cannot, right? Because it would really, again, the question is, it depends. What's going on with you, right?
Yes.
Yeah,
Yeah. All the other things going on in your body
right,
besides just your age
right.
or the fact
Right.
that you're
The
going through.
one thing I can totally speak to what I think everybody should engage with, especially already in perimenopause, but especially postmenopause, is really paying attention to nutritive herbs. And it can be food herbs as well as tea herbs, the mineral herbs that I spoke about, right? To help with mineralization and bone building and bone density. That is just something that everybody can really engage with,
All right.
right?
So, like you were giving some examples of the tea, your daily tea. Are a lot of those herbs just like a powder or the actual leaves or
It depends on, yeah, that's a great question as well. I mean, so you need a different way of, if you really want to work with, like some of, it depends on the plant's parts that we're using. Most of the herbs I put in the teas are either the leaves or the flowers or the stems, where we know this is what we use in our materia medica. Some herbs where we work with the roots, right? Like, or the rhizome, like ginger, for example, to really pull out the things we want to pull out, you would need to cook them, simmer them on the stove.
okay.
and a lot of people, and that gets makes it very complicated. So this is why I try to avoid having those. This is why I tell people cook with ginger, right? If that may be something that may be helpful for somebody. But the tea herbs are really like the dried herbs in flower, leaf, stem form. The above, like if you grow the plant, the part of the plant that's above the soil that you see growing. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. And I'd like to go back to something that you mentioned earlier, about being mindful regarding turmeric during menopause transition. Can you elaborate a little more on that?
Yeah, thanks for bringing me back. That's one of so turmeric. I just want to make this sure. I love turmeric. It's a fantastic, fabulous plant, and I love cooking with it. And I also love working with it mindfully in practice. There is a bit of a hype in turmeric regarding turmeric and surrounding turmeric. There is a bit of a hype regarding turmeric and menopause transition. There's actually some medical doctors who have a big social media platform, and their work's really good. I actually, they have written books, and I recommend their books to clients, but always tell clients skip the part about the herbs, because and they make, one of them also makes her own turmeric products and sells them. And turmeric is wonderful, has many wonderful activities like inflammation support and joint support and all of these things. However, and this is where the energetics come into play, that is very unique to herbalists working with, and not so much the functional medicine community or other communities who work with herbs. Energetically, turmeric is very warming. This is why it's nice to have some turmeric in the winter and in the fall. And it is very drying. And so if you think of menopause transition, what is something that a lot of us experience during this time is excessive warmth and heat,
Yeah.
right? And drying tissues.
Dryness. Yes.
That does not mean you saw, I put the turmeric into that one formula of my client who does experience, who's postmenopausal, who doesn't have the warmth issue, but who does experience dry tissues, logically, because that's the stage of life she's in. So it has a place, but this is why it's so important to work in a formula and not just like swallow what I call unopposed turmeric. You wanna pair it. You wanna put it in a formula with herbs that can balance out the warming and that provides some cooling, that balance out the drying and that provides some moisture. And then it can be wonderful to work with. But it's just, if I have a client who says, I'm having hot flashes on the hour and I'm having night sweats every single night, I wait until we've tamed that beast a little bit to actually add turmeric in if turmeric would be needed. So
Gotcha.
that's just sort of something that not a lot of people know or are aware of.
Good to
Yeah.
know. Yes. Great information. And one last thing here, you also mentioned something about soy, and should people worry about eating lots of soy and leading to higher estrogen levels in their body?
Short answer, no. Then there's always a bigger answer. But bottom line, I mean, short answer, no. As I said, because what is called phytoestrogen isn't estrogen, right? So it doesn't elevate estrogen levels. It just, these phytoestrogens occupy and interact with our estrogen receptors, right? What we usually see, and this is why I mentioned this. So it's going to be an FDA approved plant supplement. So it's more like it's being treated, it goes through the clinical trials right now as if it would be a pharmaceutical. And that will contain, and I forgot the name of the company, but it's going to be, approval is, I think they are aiming for 2026. And what they do is they have the isolated constituents of soy that are having these phytoestrogenic effects. However, and that's important to know with soy, because for example, I eat quite a bit of soy, just work with it in my diet, but it's important to work with the fermented forms of soy. because most of us lack certain enzymes that help to turn these phytoestrogens in soy into their active form, so they would actually do some good in our body. So that's what is already included in the fermented soy, and this is also what this company will provide in their product that is going through these clinical tests right now for approval, that they have this biologically active form
Oh,
of these
that's so
phytoestrogenic
interesting.
constituents, which is going to be interesting. Me clinically thinking, and as a practitioner, I'm thinking, well, I would always then make sure somebody who takes this also gets a nice tea with a blend of all sorts of other herbs in there to sort of balance that out a little bit, and does not take it unopposed. But yeah, that's a longer answer to your question.
Yeah, no, great. Learned a lot here. I really did. Learned a lot. Learned a lot the first time you did a webinar last year, and again this time. And thank you so much for being with us and sharing all this
Sure, of
information.
course. It's my pleasure.
Yeah. If you want to go to the next slide, I'd just like to touch on a few announcements here with everybody. We'd like to mention that we do have a YouTube channel where you can view all of our webinars and some of our podcasts we're beginning to add to the YouTube channel as well. So if you go out to youtube.com and look at the positive health / videos, and you'll find a list of all that to view on demand. And then the next slide, our upcoming webinar in May, on May 20th, we have Denise Shields, and she is going to be talking about some mindfulness habits to build resilience. So be sure to join us there. You can go out to the positivehealth.com /webinar site to register for her webinar. And then our podcast series continues, where every month we bring new topics in. And our most recent one has been with Pelly Health, the co-founders of Pelly Health, where they, really explore, what women can do, what they can consider to help improve their pelvic floor health. And you can watch this episode along with all of our other podcast episodes out on our positivehealth.com /podcast site, or on your favorite channels, Amazon, Apple, Spotify, and iHeartRadio. And then I also like to invite you, if you're not already a Positive Health member, you have the opportunity to sign up, or if you know someone who could benefit from this, share this information with them. Go to the positivehealth.com /membership site to join in to make a change for the better. This program is available through the end of June. I think on the slide here we have June 15th, but it is free. You get to enjoy all the different resources and some services that are available to our members to help with their menopause journey. So I believe that wraps us up, Kay. Thank you again very much, and thank you for those of you joining in and watching. We appreciate you supporting our Positive Health webinar series, and look forward to bringing more and more great information to you in the future.
Thank you, Kim.